I feel a bit of a fraud to be here today, because actually most of Energy Helper's activity these days is spent developing a consumer app deployed via retailers and employers that helps households to understand where they can save energy on the little talked about low-cost measures that people can take, which so far we found can reduce energy bills by somewhere between 20 and 40% depending on the household, which just some of the conversations we were having earlier about utilising all of the weapons at our disposal to tackle this problem is pretty significant. But we do still maintain a side hustle in helping companies, including some Tech Zero members, in acquiring renewable certification for some of their consumption or consumption within their supply chain. That dates from our previous incarnation as Big Clean Switch, where we were running both domestic and commercial switching services, and as a part of that I have been a long-time evangelist for the renewable certification piece more generally. And so we have found ourselves being asked by clients and then having to answer their questions and eventually to kind of help them to apply hourly matching approaches as it's become more kind of commonplace and understood by people. And today I really just wanted to talk a bit about 4 challenges that we've encountered in trying to do this at the coalface. My role and our role is in translating all of that stuff into language that kind of startups and tech startups can understand. And so, you know, with apologies to those who are probably more technically minded in the room, this is a kind of a base level, I suppose, of understanding. And the 4 things I wanted to pick out were, first of all, a kind of lack of standards that we can all hold up and work to. Second, the need to future-proof commitments. Some of these, again, as Adam said, coming last is painful because many of them have been talked about already. Imperfect data and the challenge of communicating all of this. To talk about picking a standards, part of the problem we've obviously got, particularly within the UK, for example, is that the registries haven't caught up with hourly matching, and so while we might all want timestamp certification, what we've actually got is certificates that are issued for output periods that will often be a whole month. I've sort of grossly simplified this to show what a very small wind solar farm kind of monthly generation output might look like, and I've even more simplified it by saying, let's say this is 10 megawatt hours, and so if you're looking on the REGOs registry, you can go and find 10 megawatt hours numbered sequentially in terms of certificate numbers allocated to a particular month, and that's all you know about them. So if you've then got your consumption profile, how do you then match those 10 megawatt hours? And the challenge we've got is that there isn't really a standardized approach even to doing that in the absence of timestamp registry. And we've come across 2 separate methodologies for this. One, you simply apply the generation curve from the entire month for that generation asset to every single one of the 10 REGOs that was allocated to that asset, which is pretty clunky because it means that if, for example, you wanted to source low carbon electricity certificates for weekdays, because you were, say, procuring them for your office, and you would end up having to buy certificates that represented the full generation curve, so lots of generation at weekends which you didn't need. On the plus side, it probably flattens out the pricing, so for those businesses who are looking to do it reasonably early in this trajectory, it's a bit softer, but on the negative side, it's not really true to the whole principle of hourly matching. The other approach, which I prefer, and I think is possibly one that's employed by the guys at Renewabl, is to simply say, well, those 10 megawatt hours were produced sequentially, so let's divvy up the output from the generator accordingly, and so we can work out which megawatt hours are attributed to which periods of generation, which I prefer. But the challenge we've got in trying to help businesses to actually apply this stuff is to say to them, there is no agreed approach. Some businesses are doing it one way, some businesses are doing it another, and that makes it very difficult for people to understand what they should do. Second challenge is around future-proofing, and that's very closely linked to that first one, because one of the big questions that companies are having to answer is, well, what percentage should I say I'm going to achieve? And I suppose the underlying fact is we need hourly matching because currently there is a misdistribution of supply and demand. And so it shouldn't be possible for us all to get 100% hourly matching until we fix the system. And so for a business to be targeting 100% hourly matched is probably a misnomer. And that's one of the challenges that a lot of businesses have got in terms of communicating this stuff, which I'll talk about in a minute, is that they've got to go from a place where they were probably mistakenly saying we're 100% renewable to saying actually there's a very different situation. And the other challenge that they've got is price, particularly in the UK market, because we're sort of trying to fudge the system at the moment. There is no price visibility about the price differential between a kind of peak demand or supply periods. And so we're sort of having to negotiate deals with certificate providers where we kind of make up a price difference in some cases, which is it's kind of bonkers. And until we get to a place where we have greater price certainty, it's very difficult for the companies that we work with to turn around to their FDs and say, I need you to commit to 24/7 green energy, and I need you to do it for 5 years, but I can't tell you what that's going to cost you even next year. We've got these guys who are going to help us to do it now, but we're pretty much making it up as we go along on price. And I think that's a real challenge in getting particularly smaller businesses to take up this stuff. Imperfect data is another problem. I won't labour this. We actually have some clients, mad though it sounds, that are seeking to secure certificates against parts of their supply chain that they don't have control over. So I suppose most parochially for us, home working emissions, which can be the third order of magnitude kind of category within a lot of their emissions inventories for service-based businesses. We also have lots of clients with tenanted properties where they just don't have the consumption data. Now, of course, there are ways around this. We can use proxies where we do have kind of consumption data, but it does make it much harder for some of the businesses we're working with. And then finally, communicating all this stuff. You know, if I was feeling a bit bewildered by some of the conversations earlier, then you can only imagine what some of my clients would have felt like sitting in this room. And they are charged not just with making commitments around it, but then communicating it or passing it on to their comms team so they can integrate it into their annual reporting. And that's really hard. And I think it's demonstrated how hard it is when I asked AI to come up with a visual representation of what I was going to be talking about today. And it's nuts, like completely bonkers. I think we could have all have done better, possibly by excluding the cooling towers as a starting point. But it really is quite complicated. And I think we need to develop a common language quite quickly that helps us to trickle down this to the people who are going to be kind of using it in the real world in terms of their corporate reporting, not least in terms of sort of settling out some of these conversations. I really am not comfortable with the idea of 24/7 carbon-free energy, because it's still conveying this misnomer that the energy that you're using is the same as the energy that's generated. I much prefer hourly matching, which is why I've used that phrase over and over again today, because it's true to the notion that you are simply matching your consumption with generation somewhere else. So I think we need to bottom out all of this stuff before we can really start to socialise it amongst businesses more generally. And that is my 2 cents.